Hello, everybody. My name is Mirko Novakovic. I am co-founder and CEO of Dash0, and welcome to Code Red. Code, because we are talking about code, and red stands for requests, errors, and duration, the core metrics of observability. On this podcast, you will hear from leaders around our industry about what they are building, what's next in observability, and what you can do today to avoid your next outage. Hi everyone, welcome to Code Red. Today, my guest is Evgeni Wachnowezki. He is
Hi.
Director of Product at Dash0 and also responsible for our new Darkplane product, which we will talk a little bit about. So I'm super excited. Evgeni, welcome to the show.
Yeah, nice having me, Mirko.
I will give you the first question we ask everyone
Perfect.
here, and that's what was your biggest Code Red moment?
Yes. I actually already thought about this one before I joined the podcast. So the I'm not going to pretend that I was ever an SRE, but I was a software developer. So my code red situation was basically we were basically building or migrating a COBOL application for a bigger insurance, and we were building code for like the target platform to deploy was WebSphere. But because we were like young, innocent, and didn't know what it means to deploy to WebSphere, we developed against Tomcat. So the app was working perfectly fine. And then the date came where we had to deploy the package to production or to kind of give it to the customer, and nothing worked, right? And I picked actually this example for a reason, because I think one of the things that we see right now in the market is that we're in a very kind of in a situation where the AI hype, right, and the AI coding is maturing, right? It's very immature at the moment, and there are a lot of new technologies popping up. And the question right now is I'm coding against a certain version, a certain setup, right? It's called harness engineering in the end. But then when I bring this to production, you want to make sure that this environment still works, because in theory, it's the same code, the same logic. But if you change the dependencies, everything can break, right? And this is where I think is our new observability challenges that are rising for us to solve, of course, but also for customers to face. Because one thing that I observe in the AI market and AI tooling space is that it's taking a similar kind of metamorphosis like the Java ecosystem, right? It's getting more modularized, so you have multiple crystallized like harnesses like Claude Code, Cursor, Open Code, right? Those are kind of replaceable modules. They work all a bit different, but they do the same, similar like WebSphere and Tomcat, right? That's kind of where I draw the connection between those two, at least.
By the way, does Tomcat still exist?
I think so.
I have to Google it. I mean, the people on this podcast are younger, probably, right? Yeah,
I
end of
think it's still
support.
one of the
Tomcat 9. It's Tomcat 9. 10, 10, 11. Oh my God. No, I'm seeing 11. There
you
is
will you will soon have Claude Tomcat, or
version
Tomcat AI.
11.0.23, June 17th, 2026. So it's actively maintained. It still exists. Who doesn't know it? It's if it's still the same. It's the basically reference implementation of the Surflet API, which is
Exactly.
basically the Java web server part that can execute Java codes based on HTTP requests, right? That's
Exactly.
that's what Tomcat
Exactly.
was,
And I think what people are trying to find right now is this API, right? As you said, like the servlet API is kind of like the thing that you can then implement and make it your own, right? That's why we're talking about meta harnesses and all these things. It might be a bit far reaching, right? But for me, at least from where I come from, I try to search the patterns that I know. And it's a very similar pattern in my opinion. It's
and
really
there
the
was the
industry is
strength
trying to
of
find a
That was the
API,
strengths
right?
of Java because they had this open specification, right? They had the
Exactly.
JSRs, right?
Exactly.
And you had Java EE, Java Enterprise Edition specification, which was a set of specifications. And then if you build an application server, which Tomcat is kind of a small implementation of the enterprise standard, or JBoss was one at the time, you were compatible. And then normally, and I think that was probably what shocked you, if you implement your servlet against Tomcat, it should run on WebSphere, right? If it's compliant with the standard, it should.
Exactly.
So what was the problem? I'm interested
Yeah,
now.
the problem was that basically what is the value proposition of the web sphere is that you pay a lot of money that someone maintains the dependency and the libraries that are running on this. Because if never change a running system, if you change something, something can break. So WebSphere, especially in production environments at bigger insurances, they run on ancient libraries inside. So when you're developing an application, you cannot rely on the latest and greatest, like formatting or whatever Java ecosystem libraries. You need to work against like the old stuff. And this is where it broke, right? We were assuming that we can just use Maven, get the dependencies in, build the logic, and on Tomcat was working perfectly fine. But when you try to bring this to WebSphere, you get like conflicts because the libraries exist already, but in a completely different version, and then you need to redo your work.
It's now our third company together. You started as a developer in my first company called Centric. Then you became a product manager at Instana. Then you moved to the dark side and
Yes,
worked as a product manager for Datadog. And
correct.
finally, you came back to Dash0 and you are now director of product and you work on our observability products. But recently, everything is shifting towards AI products, I would say, right? And just to summarize a little bit how we see the world evolving at the moment, we have Agent0, which is our, I would say, SRE agent, right? It's an agent in production that has a chat interface where you can ask questions. So what's wrong with my service? You can analyze a trace or a log, but you can also create dashboards, artifacts, SLOs, alerts, these things. And you can also have it fix an issue by creating a PR, right? That's kind of the core of Agent0. Pretty powerful, actually, right? And we are releasing, I think when this podcast is released that day, we are releasing Agent0 Automations, which is an automation framework where you can have agents triggered on certain events. For example, if there's an incident or a new deployment, you can have an agent check if actually the deployment was correct, right? Or things like that.
Yeah, and I think the second code red moment, which was recently, right, was when I went to customers and you were also with customers, and then I came back and I was pinging you and saying, "Hey Mirko, everyone is doing now like autonomous coding and bringing stuff into production," and you had exactly the same kind of impression and the same ideas that came together at the same moment, which was very interesting because there was no like everyone was experimenting with okay how can we automate coding, how can we automate design, how can we what are the new challenges that arise from this at the moment. Like many are still experimenting, right? So I don't think that it is reality at the moment that you ship autonomously into production because those are in the end still business critical applications and you just cannot afford something to go out, right?
It's true. But
But something
I think
changes, it's changing. Yeah.
it's changing, right? And we released our MCP server a while ago. And what we definitely see is that our customers are using the MCP server or our CLI to connect their own agents, right? Code like Claude or whatever, to build their own agentic systems that validate against it or they ask questions against the MCP server for sure, right? That's one part of the story. But we wanted to have our own agent that can use the tools that we have provided in the right way, and it's super powerful, right? And can also be connected via MCP, right? So
100%. Yeah.
yeah. So that's one part. But then the other part is when we, as you said, when we talk to customers, I think right now you can really everyone has the same story, right? Everyone has figured out since December, everyone got okay, shit, right? Coding is actually almost solved by AI, right? I think most of our customers and ourselves, we generate 90% plus of the code with AI coding agents like something like you mentioned, like the harnesses like Claude Code or Codex or Cursor. So people are using that and it's super successful. And that's generating the code. And then you have different other steps. And we are seeing that things like reviewing, stuff like Code Rabbit is coming into place, right? Because once you have the code, you need to review it, then you need to merge it. So AutoMerge is the thing a lot of people are struggling with. Then you are deploying it. And what statistics also show is yes, we are deploying way more code, but that code also has more bugs and breaks. And so that generates, I today invented that term of shifting right?
Yeah. I like it.
Because for the past decades, I would say, past, let's say, at least a decade, we are always
Yeah.
shifting left, right? We are
Correct.
shifting stuff that was production responsibility towards the developer, right? hey, you deploy now, you select the dependencies and these things. And now we are essentially shifting the problems to the right? Now we are deploying at machine speed more and more code, but the observability tools like Dash0 are literally built for humans, right? They have dashboards, they have alerts, and that's not what you need if you get such an amount of changes, right? You need a response that can handle all those changes, which is on the one hand Agent0, because Agent0
Yes,
can understand the changes, you can trigger automations, you can validate that it's up and running, you can roll back things, and you can create fixes
absolutely.
automatically and push those PRs back into your, I would say, new AI software development life cycle. Correct?
Exactly. Yes. And I think that's a great point to talk about AI coding insights, right? Because there are a couple of new risks that are also arising in at the beginning of the software development life cycle. You have kind of a looming risk of Anthropic pulling the plug on the cheap subscription-based pricing. So we saw, for example, people are like you have a $200 subscription, but in reality, people are burning like 3,000, $6,000 worth of tokens, and you have no visibility for that, right? And Anthropic's not exposing this very transparently to you. So that's why we built AI coding insights, which kind of plugs directly into the harness to get like the data from the source. So you see exactly like what are the tokens that are going out, going in, and you see the exact code costs basically for this thing. But it goes beyond. It goes beyond because I think there's also an aspect of like which skills are used and what are kind of the best practices between your developers and how do you ship faster to production. And we are connecting to GitHub to get the pull requests cycle time to explain to you, okay, you started doing using Claude, and how much faster are you actually merging and bringing the things into production from there? And then you need a baseline in the end to be able to change your harness, change your model provider, right? Have to like avoid vendor lock-in, right? I think it's a core, one of our core principles in the end is we help you to avoid vendor lock-in with these tools and also with other observability tools.
Absolutely. But let's start with, we are launching a whole new product line which we call Darkplane. And Darkplane, the name comes from the idea of the dark factory. Dark factory is, in the industry, it means you don't turn the light on anymore because the robots are doing the work and robots don't need light, right? They don't need to see.
Correct.
And so you can turn off the light and there are full like car manufacturing plants
Fully
that have no light
autonomously.
anymore,
Yeah,
right? That's called the dark factory. And if you transfer that to coding, it means that you basically prompt
exactly.
what you want to do, and then the rest goes automatically dark without human interaction into production, right? That's like
That's the vision. That's
the
the North
vision,
Star.
right? We,
Yeah.
we, we are not there yet, or some people are there, but we call it the YOLO
Yeah.
style, right? I mean, you can do it, but you need to have a lot of
Yeah,
trust and confidence.
usually you can afford this when you have little business, right?
Yeah.
Like,
But
if
once
you
you
have
are a
little to
bank or
lose.
something, right, you can't do
Exactly.
that, right? You
Exactly.
cannot just say, okay, let's prompt
Exactly.
and let's do it, right? Let's get it into
Exactly.
production. So I think today we are at the stage where coding is mostly automated, reviewing is starting to become automated, merging is still almost, for a lot of customers, auto merging is still a bottleneck, and then deployment is highly automated too,
Yes.
right? And
Right.
testing and these
Right.
things. So that's where we are. So Darkplane means, we think that to become a dark factory, you need a control plane that's based on data of your process. So as you mentioned, insights into your coding harness, etc., but also data from production, because you, for example, want to know if a component that you just created or updated has a really big blast radius, right? It's a very
Yes.
centralized component that if
Yes.
that one fails, everything fails.
Yes.
And then you maybe want to have different governance, and maybe you want a human to review it. But then you have components that are not that important. And there you can take higher risks, right? So we think that feeding back context, data from production into the coding agents will become really essential, right? And that's the whole Darkplane idea. We want to give you visibility into your coding harness, into the whole process. And we want to give you all the context and data needed to get to that dark factory. AI Insights is the first product of
Yes.
Darkplane, which is essentially observability for Claude Code and coding harnesses. And as you mentioned, what we are hearing is I mean, there's this whole. I'm always telling the story. It's a little bit funny, right? But now, if you, as a CEO like myself of startups, if you meet other CEOs at events, everybody's asking you how much tokens are you burning, right? And it's kind of
Yes.
you kind of feel that you haven't adopted the AI well if you are not like
Yeah,
token
but it's
maxing, right?
also
Oh
like
yeah,
you
I,
have
I
like a
burn millions, right?
but it goes in waves, right? Because like on LinkedIn, you first read, "Oh my God, you're not spending enough," and then you see the whiplash, and everyone says, "Oh, we started capping, and we like it's going crazy, and we burned our budget for the rest of the year in a month," right?
Yeah, but at the end of the day, what we came down to when we discussed it is like token maxing makes sense
Yes.
in a way. If you are able to spend a lot of tokens and actually create value with it,
Yes.
then it makes total sense, right? Because
Absolutely.
you get something for the money that you are spending. But the question is, if somebody tells you, I burned $500,000 in tokens, how do
Yes.
you know that
How
you
much
actually
value you
got value
created?
from it, right? Or
Yeah.
or not? And so
Yeah.
that's the problem
Absolutely.
we wanted to attack, right? The problem
Yes.
was, okay, and especially for coding agents, right? You could do that for any type of agent, and we will do that
Yes.
for other agents too. But
Right.
at the moment, we are focused on coding agents, and so the question is, if I burn 200,000 in tokens with Claude Code, what actually got created, right?
Right.
And who did it from my
Right.
developers? How is it adopted? What were the prompts? Was actually code generated? What that code merged? Was it deployed into production? And there, was it actually used? Did it have errors? Right? That's kind of
Yes.
the idea that we have.
And let me tell the story a bit further. I think we're working also on SLOs. SLOs are going to be much more valuable, much more important in the future because they it's like OKRs. You want to align your business goals with this technical metric. But this metric then will be fed back into the dark plane to give you a signal whether, was it good? Did it improve your reliability? Did it like push your adoption metrics better, right? So it's like it's coming up more and more is that where people you need to sit down and think, okay, what are the business goals that I actually want to achieve? And like in the technical world, this is you usually do it through SLOs, right? This is why we are also investing into that area. And it
Absolutely.
perfectly fits like this the dark plane story, right? Because you want not only the technical signals, they're also important to go in back into the cycle. You want also to kind of to have the higher level business signals to go into the cycle.
Absolutely. And you want those SLOs, at least a certain set, created automatically by your AI,
Of
and
course,
also
because they're hard.
updated, right? Also
Yes.
updated because they are hard to create. It's a lot of work, and so Agent 0 will
Yes.
help you with that, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
No,
And also
that's
yeah, also tune them, right? And keep them updated, et cetera, et cetera. That's where Agent 0 and automations come into play because like everything becomes like one platform that is able to automatically adapt based on the situation, tune the goals, feedback the signals. And on the other side is like we gather all the data through the OpenTelemetry standard, right? That's kind of
I mean, that's the thing, right? That's kind of
superpower.
what works in favor for us is we have this signal store, the open telemetry based backend, and it turns out that like Claude Code and others, the way they
Absolutely.
expose the data, what you're doing in your harness is all open telemetry based, right? So tell me how if I'm a user or I want to become a user of Darkplane, I want to test it, I want to get insights into my Cloud Code environment and how I'm working and where I can improve and if it makes sense and
Yes.
creates value. How do I get started?
Yeah. So there is one way is like you can simply set up Claude Code to send telemetry directly to Dash0. The only get cost in that case. But the other thing is you have a Claude Code marketplace right in your console. That's where you can find our plugin. You install it, you start a trial, you get the credentials. It's just a copy paste, drop into your Claude Code. It can self-configure itself to start sending the data. And then you start seeing how many tokens you have. You can see the chat and all the turns, all the tool calls. So you can even also see like which bash scripts are executed by Claude, right? So there is for everyone from the business side, purely cost to practitioners who are trying to learn how to code more efficiently with AI to kind of engineering leaders who are trying to really push the productivity metrics. Like this is like all the things that we are covering. And I think if you ask me like what is the differentiator towards the competitors on that one is exactly this, like from the depth of the use cases to the cost and business use cases that we're covering, basically, because
I didn't
we
ask
take
about
the raw
competitors.
information. Yeah, I know.
No, but what I found interesting, and that's just an observation, and maybe you have seen that and can give me an answer. So when I was thinking about this tool, I thought developers will maybe not like it because you get very transparent, right? At the end of the day, you can see who's doing what, and but then when we turned it on internally and we did it for a set of developers first, I saw all these measures. Can you add me? I want to see my statistics and usage, right? So my
Yes,
feeling was that developers wanted to use that to optimize their usage and see it themselves. So,
100%.
so have you seen that too, or
Yes.
I mean,
So
I
I think there are two worlds, right? There is a bit of enterprise world, especially with in our European zone. There are a lot of customers that are simply not allowed to track individual users, right? So they need to aggregate on teams, minimum 5 people per team, to be allowed to have such a tracking tool in their environments, right? That's why we have like settings where you can set up the team and then you can track, how the team are adopting and the cost per team instead of individuals, right? Purely anonymized, and you only see IDs. That's why we are doing this. And then that we have on the other side of the spectrum, we have people that are saying, every chat that I'm doing, I want to retain, and I want to come back, and I want to iterate, and I want to work with the like purely from myself to kind of say, okay, what did I do last week that was not working, or does this skill that I newly introduced actually help me move faster, right? Because that's also kind of you need to tweak the process. You need to see like what fits into the memory of the agents, and this is also an engineering process in the end, and you need observability for that, right? So you're starting engineering the engineering process, right, in the end. And I think that's where the direction is also going.
Yeah, and I have to say I'm using it also not to really control what developers are doing. I can't do it anyways, right? But I'm starting to use Cloud Code more and more for myself, also for different things. And it's a really good way to learn how to prompt on what to do, right? I'm looking at kind of the power users in our system, and I'm looking at those sessions, and I'm looking at the prompts to see how they are prompting. It's sometimes very interesting to see what they are doing, right? And which commands. I mean, for people it's maybe normal, but I can see that they say, and don't touch files, and don't do this and do that, right? It's very
Exactly.
interesting, things I would never come up with, right? But because I'm looking at it, I learn how it's used. Same with
Yeah.
automations, right? When I saw how people do this system prompting for those agents that you can automate, I read this and I was, oh, this is the way you do it, right? This is what you can do. So it's very interesting to see how you can learn by just, it's a new technology, right? Still. And I think
Absolutely, absolutely.
we need to see what's working, what's not working. And that way you can easily learn from
Exactly.
others.
And I think that's exactly it, right? It's you're experimenting at the moment. You want to find out like which MCP server does help moving faster or building better code, which skill does this, right? Those are all the things that where we provide you visibility. So for example, we have also a skill that kind of describes the software architecture. And in AI coding insights, you can see how often this skill was actually executed. And then you can really, sometimes at least I'm not tracking whether the skill is executed, right? But you want to understand whether the things that you're investing in into kind of saying, okay, I have best practices are getting adopted by the team or not. And kind of if not, it's not on the team, right? We're figuring out the tooling yet, right? We're working on the new world of building software, and everyone is experimenting.
Yeah, it's exciting. I think it's really exciting, and I think we have so many ideas there. And by the way, the next thing we are releasing is AutoMerge. Like, let's talk about that one, right?
Yes,
Darkplane AutoMerge, which is kind of, I mean, the insights is still very close to observability, but now with AutoMerge, it becomes obvious of how you integrate observability into the tool chain. So AutoMerge is essentially today, merging is still a manual process for many, right?
yes,
And how do you decide, even if you have an agentic code review, that you really want to merge and publish the code and essentially deploy it into production, right? And the way we do it, we essentially create a score, right, for a PR to decide if it's auto merged or not, right? Or if a human
correct.
needs to do it.
Right.
Can you elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, of course. I think one of the problems is that like we have people are creating more and more PRs, right? So it's getting much faster, much cheaper to generate code and get code basically. But you still want when you need someone who reviews it and you want to be certain that the changes that you make don't break production in the end. So you have the fancy coding review tools that are, giving you feedback on the code quality. But in the end, none of these tools is actually focusing on is it actually safe to make this merge? And can I replace and trust the review that was made so that it automatically allows to merge? And this is where we take like multiple categories into to the decision. We have the blast radius, for example, where we analyze, okay, are these paths kind of critical to the business application? Like how frequently are how important is this part of the code change? So if I'm just changing documentation to make it like very simple, there is no big blast radius, especially if I only change the text. So me waiting for another developer to make a review on the documentation that I made makes no sense, right? And then there is another aspect to this because you have like the PRs piling up. We see more and more people just rubber stamping the PRs, right? They like everyone knows like looks good to me, right? No one reviewed it properly, but then you have like a rubber stamp approval and then it goes into it. So we see that AutoMerge can actually bring real value by analyzing who is the code owner of the file, how much credibility does he has on the code base, what is the blast radius. And in the future, I think we will also see more and more kind of classic observability signals into going into this, right? So for example, if I have an outage going on in production, this will be a clear signal for AutoMerge to say, pause, please. We're not going to merge new things until the incident is resolved, right? Or like one thing that I'm looking forward is to we have website monitoring, right? You see how many users are touching which part of your application, having the signal of how many users you're impacting by the change by changing a button, right? Moving left, right. Those are very important things. I think there will go in the future more into the AutoMerge process as well.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And how do you see us getting to the dark factory with that? Do you
Yeah, so I
see
think
is that something you think will be reached? Just, I mean, nobody knows, right? But what do you think? Or do you think it will always be a mixture of human
yeah.
interaction and validating against data, or how?
I think the analogy that I'm looking for is like, do we have autonomous cars, right? And I think the answer is yes and no, right? The reality is that you have a very mixed kind of situation out there where you have partially autonomous driving, you have of course, in San Francisco with Waymo, you have complete autonomous driving, but it also has certain constraints and it works in certain environments. And I think that's going to be the same with the autonomous software delivery lifecycle, where you will have use cases and things where you will be able to drive completely dark, basically, and develop and bring stuff into production. And there will be still areas where you need kind of partially autonomous intervention from humans and people who are doing these things, right? I think it's maybe a controversial take, but I think there is a world where you can do a lot of things without human oversight inside the software delivery lifecycle.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Evgeny, it's exciting times. So, I
Yes,
mean, we are both in the observability world now for a long time, but the
yes,
rate of change that's happening right now has I have never
it's
seen in my
mind-boggling.
life, right? It's almost hard to catch up with, right? And
Yeah.
see how it's going. But it's exciting, right? For our
Yes,
customers. I mean, but you get so much, you get kind of a superpower in production and also in development. And that will, at
yes,
the end of the day, I think it will lead to more applications, right? Way more
agreed.
applications, way more software. That means way more data.
Yeah, but I think it will also lead to way more observability in the end because
Exactly.
it,
Yeah.
because you like the dark factory is not going to like yes maybe it runs on its own, but you need to understand how it runs, what it does. You need to feedback and kind of keep controlling it, right? Similar, there are a lot of autonomous processes in the industry, and I think this is one that you build and you need observability for that. You need to see into the system to kind of tune it and engineer and also adapt with changing demand in the market, right? I think it's also not correct to pretend that you built the perfect software and then you're done, right? you always need to continue evolving and innovating and doing things, right? And I think that's where observability is absolutely critical.
No, absolutely. I just wanted to point out that this will create way more data, right? Way more data at the end of the day. And we were
Yes.
discussing recently what's the answer, right? I think the market at the moment has different views on it, right? There is, I would say, the bring your own cloud
Yes.
topic where you say, okay, because you have to store so much data, and with the model like SaaS, where you have a gross margin on it, etc., that doesn't really work anymore. So we push the cost for storing and processing the data to the customer. That's bring your own cloud,
Yes.
right? Then you
I'm
can
I'm
store.
laughing. I'm laughing because I did it at Instana on-prem, right? And
Yeah, yeah,
for
I know,
me,
I
it
know, I
sounds
know,
like
I know.
on-prem in a
You're
trench
not,
coat.
I know you're not a big fan, right? But I'm just saying this is like you push the data towards the customer, and the main
Yes.
claim of those vendors is, hey, now you can store everything, and if you
Yes.
drop data, this is normally the data you will be missing when you
Right.
have an issue,
But I think
right?
there is a big problem, right? And to this story is that, and we see this in POCs a lot, is that people don't like cleaning up their data, right? And with garbage data, you also like no AI, no UI, like will actually help you to find the signal inside the noise, right? I think that's a very big topic, and I think it's a lie to say, okay, yeah, you keep everything, but what is the outcome, right? I think you need to think about your observability strategy in the end
It is
to be
easy, right? It
successful,
is
right? It's
easy
easy,
to do
yes,
that, right? Because you don't have to change. But I agree, right? We are releasing Signal Control, which is essentially a feature that helps you get back control over your signals, logs,
yes,
metrics, traces, by
absolutely,
heavily reducing the amount of data you are storing, right? And
yes,
and this is not primarily a cost thing. It saves you a lot of costs, right? Because you pay
yeah,
for it,
sure,
but primarily, and that's, I think, the point that you are making. And I like always to say, if you search for a needle in the haystack,
yes,
it doesn't make sense to make the haystack bigger, right? It makes sense
exactly,
to make the haystack smaller because it's easier to find the needle in a smaller haystack, right? So
yes, absolutely,
that's kind of the idea here. And also, I would agree that, I mean, we see it so many times that, I don't know, recently a customer, again, there's a framework called Hibernate in Java, right? Debug
yes,
logs turned
yes,
on all the
yes,
time, terabytes of data. No, nobody needs that, right? I mean, you maybe need that in the debugging situation. So I can see this becoming more and more adaptive, right? I can see you keep like 5% of the data, but then you have an incident and you want, or a slow running transaction, you want to get more data, and you turn it on for this specific component, right? And get profiling, more insights. You turn on debugging also for Hibernate, right? You collect all the data when you need them, and then you turn it off again, right? But collecting all that data
just
just
for the
because you
one
think you
case, yeah,
maybe need it one
yes,
day, I think it's a mess, right? And
yeah,
I think we need to change that. And I get that we do that, right? Because even the bring your own cloud vendors, they get the money for the number of nodes and etc. We all participate essentially on getting more data in. Bigger systems means you get more money, right? But I think we need to really give customers the tools to reduce the data and concentrate on the signals.
yeah, and I think core part of
Even
signal
on Bring Your Own
control,
Cloud, right? I have nothing
yeah,
against Bring Your Cloud. You can do Bring Your Own Cloud if, for security reasons, etc. But that doesn't change the fact
exactly,
that you should
yes.
clean up your data.
Yeah, you need to put in the hard work, right? And on the other side is like this is why we're building signal control is we want to make it easy to do this work, right? This is I think a core pillar because in theory or kind of purely there all the tools are available, right? To do this and to clean up, but it's very hard. And this is where I think like this is why we brought signal control to life is to make it like a productized nice experience for you to do this.
To sum it up, today we are releasing Darkplane, our kind of control plane for the Dark Factory for your AI coding agents, which feeds back data into the process, but also observes and helps you optimize your AI coding processes. And then we also release Agent0 Automations, which is a full automation framework for, and we have a full catalog of agents that we will provide. And you can build your own agents and run them in production. It's kind of your nervous system for production now. Super exciting. And pretty soon, Signal Control that is available in a closed beta at the moment, that will be available to heavily reduce the amount of data that you have to process and store. So super exciting, much more to come. And Evgeni,
Yes.
exciting to work with you on that and see what the
Yeah,
next 6
looking
months
forward
will
to the
bring, right?
future.
Nobody knows, right?
Yes.
We don't have a roadmap for 6 months anymore.
No, it doesn't make sense.
No, perfect.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
for your time.
Thanks for listening. I'm always sharing new insights and insider knowledge about observability on LinkedIn. You can follow me there for more. The podcast is produced by Dash0. We make observability easy for every developer.